Hello friends and welcome back to my channel where we mainly discuss thrillers on Thursdays, and today I'm super excited because I'm going to be talking about all of my favorite audiobooks. This is a list I've been putting together for, I want to say, almost a year. Every time I've been finishing an audiobook I really love, I've been adding it to this. And I'm not going to start off this video talking about whether or not listening to audiobooks is actually reading. There are already a lot of videos on that, and I think it's obviously reading. It activates the same parts of your brain, so we're just going to move on. Before I get into the books, I wanted to talk a little bit about why I listen to audiobooks and where I listen to them. So I mainly, because I'm cheap, listen to them on the Libby app. This is a free app where you log in through your library card number and just log in. But sometimes it can be a long queue, like 6 months long, for books that are really popular. I have also used Audible for a lot of different free trials, but for me, I'm just a little too cheap to commit to it. So if you guys have another place where you like to listen to audiobooks, definitely leave that down below. Personally, I listen to audiobooks for 2 reasons. One, I have sort of a long commute to work. In the morning, it's not too bad. It's like 35 minutes. Coming home, it's about 45 minutes, so I can definitely get in over an hour of reading. And one of my goals actually for 2019 is to cut down on podcasts and really just subscribe to a few that I love so that I have more time to listen to books. And the other way I listen to audiobooks is to help me kind of wind down at night and fall asleep. And I always have, and I feel bad to call them this, but I have my like sleeping audiobooks where I will listen to kind of a book that I'm interested in, but I'm not super gripped by, so I won't feel bad if I miss a few minutes if I fall asleep before I turn it off. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into my favorite audiobooks, and definitely leave your favorites down below. The 3 categories are: first, horror; 2, autobiographies; and 3, I didn't know what else to call this, so I just called it fun experience. And overall, for all of these 3 categories, the reason they're favorite audiobooks is because I feel like listening to them as an audiobook really enhances the reading experience. So first, getting into our first category, horror. For me, horror is really great as an audiobook because I think a lot of times they will add in sound effects, and it's overall just a lot creepier listening to it personally for me than it is to read a lot of these books. This is the first horror novel that I really loved as an audiobook is The Elementals by Michael McDowell. This is a Southern Gothic horror, and it takes place in the Deep South, where a family spends a summer at a house, and the house right next to them is slowly filling with sand. The narrator of this book is R.C. Bray, and he has a really strong Southern accent, which generally, and no offense if you have a Southern accent, I don't mean this in a rude way, but generally that's not something I would turn on an audiobook and be like, oh great, they have a super strong Southern accent. But because this takes place in Alabama, I just think it works so well, and he is just wonderful. The banter between the mother and his daughter India is just hilarious with how he does it. So the reading experience was definitely super enhanced because of R.C. Bray. So if you still haven't checked this one out, because I know I've talked about The Elementals and a lot of the other books I'm going to be talking about today before, definitely listen to it as an audiobook. The next book I have right here, and that is The Devil in Nanking. And this is about a young English woman who travels to Japan in search of this one piece of very specific and very brutal footage of the 1937 Nanking massacre. And so this has 2 narrators, although the majority of it I would say is by Josephine Bailey, who plays the young English woman, and something about her just sweet angelic voice just really adds to the story. The other perspective, it takes place during that Nanking massacre leading up to it. Both sections are incredibly powerful. This is a horrifying book. It's very brutal. Although this is historical fiction, most of it is just fiction, but that doesn't make it any less terrifying learning about some of the things that happened. So if you haven't checked this one out yet, I highly recommend it. Finally, for horror, we have The Haunting of Hill House. Now, I have reviews of the TV show and the book up. If you haven't watched or read either, I recommend both. They're also totally different aside from the title and a couple other Easter eggs. The plots have very little overlap, so you're not going to spoil yourself reading or watching one of the other first. The book version, the classic by Shirley Jackson, is about a group of people who come together into Hill House, which is known to be haunted, to investigate it. And I thought one of the best parts of this book, although I do find it very scary, were the sound effects that were added and also the banter between the characters, which I found really funny, and I thought their narrator had a really fun time with it. So I think the book might have felt a little bit dry if I had read the physical copy, so I really enjoyed the audiobook version. And getting into the second category, we have autobiographies / true stories or true crime. So for a lot of these, it's interesting because you might immediately think, oh, if these are autobiographies, they're probably all read by the author, which makes the reading experience a lot more personal. And in one of these cases that is true, but in the other two, they're not actually read by the author, but I still felt like I was hearing it from the author's voice, even though cognitively like I knew that I wasn't. It just did make the reading experience a lot more personal. So first we have Hunger by Roxane Gay. This is the story of her body, and I'm just a little bit obsessed with Roxane Gay. I was even on the way home from work listening to her on Bitch Sesh, one of my favorite podcasts, where she was guest starring. But on the one hand, I just adore her voice in general, but number two, because this is her story and her own story of her body and she's reading, she just adds so much passion to it that I don't think another narrator would have been able to make it feel so true. So if you haven't checked out Hunger or anything else by Roxane Gay, I highly recommend either downloading this as an audiobook or maybe just finding some YouTube videos of her or podcasts and just listening to her speak anywhere. Next we have In Order to Live, and this is narrated by A.G. Kim. Now again, this is not narrated by the author, but there's something about listening to this, and honestly listening to most true accounts of things like this happening, I just really prefer as audiobooks, and I thought this was a lot more powerful listening to it as a narration. Did see some reviews where some people, I was kind of surprised by, didn't like the narration of this book, but I personally really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I didn't read a physical book. And I really enjoyed first finishing the audiobook and then going on and going to YouTube and watching video, I don't know why I'm saying video, you know it's a video, video interviews with the author and learning more about her that way. And that's kind of something I really like to do whenever I'm reading nonfiction, is to listen to it as an audiobook and then go to YouTube to kind of see more about it and have it come to life even more. And finally, for autobiography / true crime, we have I'll Be Gone. What accent was that? We have I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and I'm sure you guys know what this is about because it's very popular right now. I just reviewed it, but this is the true crime story of the Golden State Killer. And once again, this is not narrated by the author Michelle McNamara. It's narrated, has an opening by Gillian Flynn, a closing by Patton Oswalt, and then it's narrated by Gabra Zachman. But again, even though it's not narrated by the narrator, I thought Gabra did such a wonderful job bringing this to life. I just thought she had an incredibly relaxing voice, and it felt oddly comforting listening to her voice when it's so soothing when you're reading about such graphic, horrific rapes and murders. I just really, in a weird way, found it comforting listening to her. And if you haven't jumped on the I'll Be Gone in the Dark hype train, I highly recommend it. And again, this one's really fascinating to finish this book and then to dive down into threads online, especially now with everything that's come to light. It's really interesting following this case now. Okay, and then for the last category, we have fun experience, because I didn't know what to call these, but it's just where the reading experience was heightened in just kind of a crazy, wonderful way by the authors themselves or by the narrators themselves. And I should say up front, I want to know why you guys listen to certain books as audiobooks over others, or what your favorite audiobooks are. But my first one on this, and I have a feeling this might be some of your guys' favorite audiobook of all time, and that is You by Caroline Kepnes. Now, I feel like a bit of a fraud adding this one to the list, because although obviously I've read the books and watched the show, I didn't actually listen to this as an audiobook, although I have heard clips, and I fully understand why people who say they listen to this as an audiobook say that everybody should. Personally, I'm just not a big rereader, so I probably won't listen to it maybe, you know, some years down the road when I forget what happened in the book. Now, I picked up the book and read it really fast, and that was before I heard anybody talk about the audiobook, and now I'm actually upset that I hadn't already heard about, what's his name, Santino Fontana, because he does just have the sexiest voice imaginable. and I've heard a lot of people say that, you know, Penn Badgley, you know, tried to kind of have as good of a narration in the show, but a lot of people are just obsessed with Santino's voice. And if you listen to some clips online, I fully agree. But again, even though I didn't listen to this one as an audiobook, I've just had so many of you guys recommend it, I had to add it onto the list in case anybody else was not aware. And next we have Eileen by Ottessa, I don't have the last name here, Moshtef, I think. And although the cover and the plot summary of this is going to make you think it's a thriller, it is not. It is an incredibly slow-paced, weird character study, and I have a review of this and I think every other book I'm talking about here already on my channel. But this is about a lonely young woman working in a boys' prison outside Boston in the early 60s. And I think because this is a really strange character study, it works so well listening to Alyssa Breshnahan. I think that's how you say it. She's the narrator of this book, and I think listening to her gets you into Eileen's crazy mind so much more than just reading the physical book, because she is a very disturbing person with very disgusting, strange habits. So again, sometimes I like to listen to an audiobook simply because it's a really interesting character study, so listening to the narrator kind of gets you into that character's head, even if that's not a place you want to be. And finally, one of the most fun experiences I had, this was actually a comic book series that was brought to life that I listened to, that I had so much fun listening to, and that is Lock and Key. I also found out that Lock and Key is going to be made into a Netflix series, which is very exciting, even though I think it was previously a show and never came to be aired. I'm not sure what happened there. But this is a family in Maine and a haunted house with all these different doors. And I'm gonna be honest, even though I listened to this and I remember enjoying listening to it and the experience was so wonderful, I think Haley Joel Osment is one of the narrators. They have a lot of different narrators, which made this one really fun. If you asked me to give you more than 2 lines about what happens in this book, I would not be able to. And I feel like generally I'm pretty good at remembering what happens in books, but I'm gonna be surprised watching the Netflix show because I really have amnesia when it comes to this comic book series. But with that being said, like I said, this was so fun. And if you have any other recommendations for books where it's lots of different narrators playing the different characters, because it really just brought the book or the comic book series to life so well and made it just incredibly fun. So those were all of my favorite audiobooks. If you guys have any recommendations for what your favorite audiobooks are, why you like to listen to certain books as audiobooks, or I'm really interested to hear where you listen to audiobooks, especially if you have any tricks for it being cheap. But I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the week, and I'll see y'all next Thursday. Bye.